Today, we're going to just talk about complexity a little bit and then look at how complexity is referenced on the actual AP Lit exam. So kind of what this stream is getting you ready to look for and look at. And then we're going to do some and you're going to help me. So that practice analysis and your turn, they're really kind of the same thing. So you're just going to tell me what to put on the screen and I'll put it there as we work through the complexity of this poem together. So why this topic? So I wanted to talk about complexity because the poetry question on the AP Lit exam often, I won't say always, but it often asks about complexity. So in 2019, it was about the complex portrayal of the landlady. In 2018, it was about the complex relationships between the speaker, implied audience, and plant life, which actually sounded a little bit like an AP Lang prompt, but it wasn't. And then 2017 asked about the relation, you had to analyze the relationship between music and the speaker's complex memories. And so this word complex is brought up quite a bit. Probably your teachers have already talked to you about complexity and just thinking about what that means and what it looks like, because if you do not indicate your understanding of the complexity of the poem, then you haven't answered the prompt. And with this new rubric, if you have not indicated the complexity of the poem, your understanding of the complexity of the poem in your thesis, then you are in danger of getting a much lower score than you should. So I just wanted to put those up there. We're not going to use any of those poems today. We'll save those for later in the year. But just to show you that for the last 3 years, that word complex has been in the prompt. It's very likely to continue to be so because that's the analysis that's being asked. So what is complexity? So there are lots of ways to look at it. We know what complex is. It's like a relationship that's complicated. You know, there are sides of it. I say this, thing about the way my mother told me about how strict my mother is. My mother says that I misbehave too much. So, there's complexity to pretty much anything that has people in it. And then, some things that don't. So it's the idea that it consists of many different and connected parts. And that's really important that you remember both of those pieces, that the parts are different, but that they are connected. And so they might be connected in conflict, they might be connected in agreement, but there's going to be the more than one side to it. And so you're going to be thinking about the but that you find in the poetry, the and that you find in the poetry, the yet that you find in the poetry. And so it's like, it's got onions. I mean, it's got layers like an onion, like Donkey and Shrek. So we all do. We all have layers. And so again, anytime you're speaking about life, about people, about humans, about the human condition, you're going to have that complexity. And that's why it shows up in poetry all the time. And poetry, at least on the AP Lit exam, but poetry in general, I like to think is about life. And so it's going to include all these sides, all these perspectives. And so it's going to indicate that. And because of the AP Lit exam is going to ask you to analyze that complexity, they're going to give you a poem that works with that. So that gives you that you can find. So it's going to have facets to it. It's going to have a tension in it. It might have full out conflict, some sort of debate or discussion that's happening. That happened a few years ago with the black walnut tree. There was kind of a debate going on. Also in Memory of Music, that was maybe 3 years ago, 2017, there was clear conflict. Sometimes the conflict is a little clearer than others. Sometimes it's internal, sometimes it's external, but that's what we're looking for when we talk about complexity. Am I talking too fast? I feel like I'm speaking very quickly. All right, so starting, not with humans, starting with just this idea of a conflict, right? So we get that, but just backing up a little bit to think about how we can write about it. So when you think about jellyfish, so the top picture I think is beautiful. I live in Atlanta. We have an aquarium that's got some renown to it, and it's got the most beautiful jellyfish I've ever seen. But they are awesome to look at, and they are beautiful to watch. They move so gracefully through their tank. or through the ocean. However, the bottom picture can be, the consequence of getting too close to that beauty. And so there's probably some thematic implications that we could get from there about getting too close to beauty or beauty being dangerous, but that's not really the point. The point is that there are two sides to encounters with the jellyfish. So to gather those two sides, to gather that complexity into a sentence, I have this despite, right, which indicates that we've got some tension here. So despite the beauty in their coloring and grace in their movement through the ocean, jellyfish are also dangerous and should be admired from afar while enjoying aquatic activities. And so this is kind of the way that your thesis might start to work when you're writing about a complex portrayal or a complex relationship. You're probably going to have some indication of complexity. So that italicized despite, there's a little key at the bottom of the slide, right? That italicized despite lets us know there's going to be two sides of this. We're going to be looking at this not completely one way or another. And so then you want to establish that you understand. And so one of the important things with a thesis is that you let the reader know that you get it and that you're going to explain it. And so I think if you're looking for some kind of a template, it is that you are ready to tell not only that you have found the complexity, that you're making an argument about it, but that you know what that argument is going to be. And too often, students tend to write theses that don't make an argument. They're going to support the argument, but you have to make it. And on this new rubric, you have to make that point, right? You have to establish a position in order to earn the point. So again, we've got an indicator of the complexity. We have what the facets are of that complexity, how there is some tension, and then the message that we're giving, which in a thesis would be more like a theme, or what the relationship is. But I've established that I get it. I know what these sides are. And not only am I saying they are beautiful and they are dangerous, but there's a message there that I'm establishing. I'm making an argument about jellyfish that they should be admired from afar. So that's also an important piece when you're trying to establish complexity or trying to analyze complexity, that not only do I get that there's, A versus B, but also what that means. I'm establishing a personal message about what that means. So I like to call this a chat check. So if you're live, all the way live, you're going to write a sentence that expresses the complexity of high school, right? For example, right, maybe. So at the bottom is the school that I went to, San Diego State University, and I had to go through high school in order to get to college. And I had to remember that I had some college aspirations, that in my future were some rewards for my behaviors. And so you're going to write a sentence that expresses the complexity of high school. Think about despite A, B, or although A, B, regardless of B, A is true, therefore, that sort of thing. So if you're here and you're live, I'll give you some minutes to think of a sentence that expresses two sides of your high school experience. Thank you, Natalie. You might be the only person participating. So I want to push you, Natalie, to give that sentence one more clause and think, despite high school causing students a lot of anxiety, it does properly prepare them for higher education and life in general, right? So what's your message? Or do you fall on the, it seems like your sentence is set up so that it will drop you in the high school is more positive because of its preparation. And so then what should a student do? Yes, I don't know if you were saying that in all seriousness or with a little levity to it, but yes, right? So if you put those together, despite high school causing students a lot of anxiety, it does properly prepare them for higher education and life in general. Therefore, students should seek help in order to, persevere through the anxiety, right? So thank you very much. Exactly. And so it lets you know A plus B, therefore my message. I don't want to make it C. I often try to make math equations out of English concepts, and it doesn't work very well. My students tell me stop. Okay. So again, we've got some clues to complexity, what you might find in a poem that would indicate that it is complex. Those sort of transitional indicators, which would be the same sort of transitions that you would use to write about the complexity. Those same despite, although, regardless, however, yet, but, and those also are indicators of a shift. And then if you find any internal conflict within the speaker, which is what we're about to find. So this poem, America by Claude McKay, is one of my favorite poems because of its complexity, because of the historical kind of impact of it, and the indicators of the speaker. But I think that it's not, it's very strong in theme because it's not specific to this speaker. There are many people who have a complex relationship like this. So we're going to read through it twice. And on the side, you see there's a read 1 and read 2. And so what I'd like you to do is, as I'm reading, you're looking for the words that imply transition or contradiction. That's for the first read. We're just looking for what implies a transition or contradiction. And then in a few words, what is the conflict? And so we're going to try to find, you know, kind of abstract, the two abstract facets of the poem. So kind of, you know, this idea versus this idea, not necessarily the speaker versus anyone, right? Not trying to make it concrete necessarily, but abstractly, what are the two sides? And then this poem refers often in she, her, hers pronouns. And so I want you to be able to describe her. So we're going to talk a little bit about the speaker, but also what her, what she is like. So, although she feeds me bread of bitterness and sinks into my throat her tiger's tooth, stealing my breath of life, I will confess I love this cultured hell that tests my youth. Her vigor flows like tides into my blood, giving me strength erect against her hate. Her bigness sweeps my being like a flood. Yet, as a rebel fronts a king in state, I stand within her walls with not a shred of terror, malice, not a word of jeer. Darkly, I gaze into the days ahead and see her might and granite wonders there, beneath the touch of time's unerring hand, like priceless treasures sinking in the sand. So a word really quickly. You might notice from the rhyme scheme that this is a little bit like a sonnet. It doesn't have necessary, so rhyme scheme wise it is, meaning wise it can't be broken up into the traditional pieces. But at the end there is a couplet, which tells us that there's going to be some sort of answer or prediction or riddle, something that's going to kind of sum it up, because that's what the couplet at the end of a sonnet does. But we're not going to talk too much about that, although if you notice a sonnet, then you can use that form to predict where you might find shifts. All right, so firstly, what words indicate attention or contradiction? Cultured hell, absolutely. And that's kind of an oxymoron, right? Because we think of cultured as being kind of sort of polished, and hell as not. Hell as being, you know, rather wild. So cultured hell, very good. Anything else that implies attention or contradiction? And so really, even from the beginning, we see this although. That idea means that we're starting with an indicator of contradiction, that there's going to be something that's going to be the other side. So although she feeds me bread of bitterness, right? And so then what's the other side of that? Although she feeds me bread of bitterness and sinks into my throat her tiger's tooth, stealing my breath of life, what's the indicator of the other side of that? So if we see someone is fed bitterness and has a tooth sunk into their throat, would we expect a negative or positive response to that? We would think that they would be pretty angry at that person or the she, right? However, um, I love, and even in this one line, so what's the opposite of yellow? Purple. We'll use this bright pink. Even in this one line, I love the cultured hell that tests my youth, right? And so this is a little, unexpected, right? So that creates the tension that you love a hell that tests the youth. And so if we continue to find yellows that are contradiction, and then the pinks are going to be the things that are positive, and then we can definitely look at what that means. So if we know that there's bread of bitterness, however, right, the speaker loves this cultured hell, and we see that the next line after the cultured hell line, her vigor flows like tides into my blood. So that's a excellent thing, right? We want to be vigorous. We want to have vigor flow into our tides. But the next line again has a paradox in it, giving me strength erect against her hate. So she, whoever this she is, flows into the speaker, but gives the speaker strength against her. So she's feeding this antagonist, or the antagonist is feeding the protagonist, however you'd like to look at it. And so we've got strength against her hate. So this is another contradiction here, that she gives me strength erect against her. So we'll call that yellow. And then her bigness sweeps my being like a flood. And we can look at that either positively or negatively, and we'll come back to that. Yet as a rebel fronts a king and state, and yet is always an indicator of some sort of contradiction. There's one side versus another, or that there's an indicator of one thing leading to an indicator of another. I stand within her walls with not a shred of terror, malice, not a word of jeer. Darkly I gaze into the days ahead and see her might and granite wonders there beneath the touch of time's unerring hand, like priceless treasure sinking in the sand. So we're going to leave that yellow for our read number one, for the words that imply attention. And so what we're looking for, not even yet, is to be able to call that tension an idea, but to indicate these are things that either say there are two sides, like although or yet, or indicate two sides, like the paradox and the oxymoron that we found. So that's the first part, that these words exist that imply attention. And so somebody tell me, what does this seem to be? What are the two sides of this conflict? Who is it? Even if we use concrete, like what are the two sides? What's the conflict? Who's the protagonist and who's the antagonist in this poem? And you can be as abstract or concrete as you like. It can be a concept. You can call a person. Okay, the antagonist is the woman that gives her strength against her hate. Awesome. And so who's on the other side? Right. So we've got two sides, right? The speaker versus this antagonist, the speaker versus her. We can call it any of that. But also, if you take that and think a little more symbolically, and also look at the title. Do you think, if the title is America, do you think that the speaker is America or the her is America? Right. Awesome. So now we've got America versus something, right? A citizen, another country, right? So any of these things could be argued, and without giving any historical background, that doesn't really matter, right? That we know that it's something or someone versus this idea of America. And so America the speaker's perception of America is twofold, right? That they feel as though America's making them bitter and trying to kill him or her, trying to kill the speaker, but that the speaker still loves this country, this concept, this symbol, and that even standing in front of her, like a king, like a rebel for a king and state, and that's not a very American concept, right? We don't have a king, but even, you know, as a rebel would front a king and state or confront kind of a king and state, even in that place, even in that rebellious state, still not hateful, still not angry, but just ready to confront this big symbolic America. Okay, so we have number one highlighted in yellow for read number one. We have number two. The conflict is this speaker representing some group within versus the idea of America. And so, what is she like? And not necessarily with text, right? Not necessarily what does the speaker say that she does or is like, but what can you extrapolate from that? Like, what kind of America is this that's being described? Hateful, okay. Let's try to say one more thing. Destructive and hateful. And it could be in those lines. You can say that there is a complexity even on that one side. And I want to direct you to the first line because there's a little bit of complexity even within that line. Yes, exactly, Jada. Exactly. And so that is really pretty scary. It's like it's like the opposite of like a bad seed kind of idea, right? That this mother is that, well, I just misspoke, but that there's a nurturing character that is feeding the speaker, right? That America is feeding the speaker, but the bread is bitter, right? And so at the same time that there's a nurturing side, there's also this destructive and hateful side. And so it's almost like smothering, you know, a mother smothering the child to death. And so it gets a little dark when you look at it that way and think about a mother, but also that helps us to consider why America is referred to as she. Because if we assume that Claude McKay as a man is speaking as a man, then a she might be a mother, might be a partner, right? And so there's a reason that we're looking at her, looking at the country through that lens. So that's an excellent catch. Thank you, Jada. So we're starting to build this complexity, right? We see that even within the speaker versus America tension, there is another tension in the way that not only he sees her, but the way that she treats him. And so if we read it again, and so the idea of an up, down, both, and I don't know if this is something that you've been taught ever, but it's an annotation tool that's a lot easier on paper with a pen. And so I'm not going to try to fully capture it on this screen. But the idea is, as an annotation, up, down, both, why. And so those are options. And so as you read a line in a poem or in a prose text, maybe a chunk or a paragraph, you're thinking, does this get an up arrow for some reason, a down arrow for some reason, both arrows, and then why? And so in terms of establishing complexity, if you go through and you're annotating with these positive and negative indications, then at the end, when you're writing about it, you're able to pull those out to create, to find evidence for that complexity. And so I find it to be one of the most useful annotation methods, especially in a timed situation, because you're just quickly jotting an arrow and like what that arrow indicates. So what the positivity is or why you wrote that. And so, so I want to just hand you that as an annotation tool, up, down, both, why, if you've never used that before. Because again, when you're looking at complexity, then you're able to pull and you're say, this is my cup of up, and this is my bowl of down. And so you can separate those or use them against each other as you write. So very slowly. And there's a little bit of a lag, so I'm not going to try to ask anyone to kind of give me an up or down per line. But I think the easiest way is just going to be able to pull. And so just to have some line numbers. So just to have some line numbers for ups and some line numbers for downs when we're done. So like, although she feeds me bread of bitterness, again, as Jada pointed out, that's got the hateful and the nurturing side. And so we would give that both. And so we would, you know, acknowledge the bread part, acknowledge the bitterness, and we would be able to call that both. And let me see, because I was playing around and I did an okay job of inserting these arrows. Oh, it didn't do it like that before. That's not very helpful. So we won't do that. But so we've got line 1 is a both, and I'm just going to say both. I'm just going to write a both. Sinks into my throat her tiger's tooth. Clearly, that's a down. Stealing my breath of life, I will confess. And because he doesn't confess in there, that's going to be a down. And then I love this culture hell that tests my youth. And that's a both. Does that make sense? Okay, good. All right, so her vigor flows like tides into my blood. We've got an up finally, like a full up. And really, it's funny. I always think of this poem as being mostly up, but it's really not. Giving me strength erect against her hate. I'm going to call that a both. And then, so the problem is that I can't type on the slide and see you guys at the same time. So I'm going to amend that. Okay, so here we go. So her bigness sweeps my being like a flood. Is that an up, a down, or a both? Her bigness sweeps my being like a flood. Up, down, or both? Okay, Selena says both. Can you give us a little bit of why both? And honestly, while you're thinking, or anybody can support Selena. It doesn't have to be Selena. Right, business as a positive, okay? Exactly. And so it's really interesting. And this is why some people hate poetry. But sometimes I read it as though bigness sweeping my being is a complete up. Sometimes that's what I see. You know, it feels like, yes, you know, you want to be flooded by feeling in this situation. And sometimes I read it the way that Selena just said, that this, you know, this idea of infusing bigness into a person is absolutely positive, right? But then the sweeping of a being is destructive, right? It's too much, right? We don't need a flood of strength. And so all of these things, even within all these lines, we've got this back and forth as he kind of develops this relationship with his maybe lover, maybe wife, maybe mother, this nurturing feminine presence that is America. All right, so we've got sweeps my being like a flood, that's a both. Yet as a rebel fronts a king in state. It depends on how you look at history. It depends on how you look at rebellion. Should a rebel confront a king, a currently sitting king? Maybe yes, if they have something righteous to be rebellious about. Maybe no. You know, and so here we start to get into a very subjective reading with your own, you know, ideas. And so again, like I was saying about the bigness sweeping the being like a flood, maybe today you see, I don't know, it's not such a great idea to confront a king in state. Maybe you want to wait until that king is deposed, or maybe you want to, you know, confront not the king, but the ensign with the flag in the back. So that's going to depend on you. So I'm not even going to have you choose, but think about that. But also maybe you say, you know what? I really feel like absolute power corrupts absolutely. And so if anybody has anything to say, they should be able to confront the king, right? So it may be an up, it may be a down, it may be a both. However, what we do know is that there's a yet at the beginning of this sentence, which indicates a shift in the speaker's telling. So something's shifting from the description of what America does to the speaker to what the speaker is doing in response. And so that is happening in the 8th line of a sonnet, which is not exactly where you'd expect for it to be happening. You'd expect for it to be happening in the 9th line of a sonnet, but that's a whole other stream for a whole other day. And actually will be a stream on another day, how form creates meaning, which is coming up in the next couple weeks. So if you'd love to hear me nerd out about sonnets and villanelles, please come to how form creates meaning. It might be me, it might be someone else. Anyway, so we have this shift to what the speaker is doing in response to this behavior from her, the big, strong, hateful, destructive, nurturing her. And just the fact that we have all these adjectives about her already means that we're building commentary, right? That we're inferring who she is to him through her behaviors. And that's how excellent essays get written. And that's how wonderful students such as yourselves ace the AP Lit test. So I stand within her walls with not a shred of terror, malice, not a word of jeer. Again, is this the expectation that we have from the speaker who is at every turn, torn down by this she? Not necessarily, right? So then we have more tension, and we have some tension. This adds to the tension within him. So I stand within her walls with not a shred of terror, malice, not a word of jeer. And I'm going to make that pink in coming back to all the ways that he feels positively. And even in the confrontation, even standing ready to confront her, he still is not angry, not afraid, not malicious, just in this confrontation. Okay, so to wrap it up, the end of this last quatrain and then the couplet. And please, if I'm speaking fluent poetry and you'd rather me speak English, let me know that, please. Okay, so darkly I gaze into the days ahead and see her might and granite wonders there. What are granite wonders? What kinds of things does America have that might be considered granite wonders? Just a little bit of context. This poem was written in the 1910s, early 1920s. And if you know any architecture history or just, what was going on, what kinds of things might be granite wonders, either natural or man-made? Might be monuments, might be the stone mountains of the world. I don't know if Stone Mountain is that old. Statue of Liberty, yes, right? That's what I always think about. But also like these, maybe not granite, but like skyscrapers, right? These wonders, these man-made wonders that established the might of America at that point in history. I'm not a history teacher. I just like to make some connections sometimes. Okay, so here we go. He's going to wrap it up here with this couplet. The fact that these last two lines rhyme with themselves lets you know that we're shifting here. We're going to wrap it up. We're going to put a bow on it, and that bow is going to be pretty, and it's going to have perfectly symmetrical, bow sides. I don't know what those are called. Loops. So if you've ever tried to tie a beautiful bow, you know that's perfectly symmetrical loops, not the easiest thing. So we're not going to assume that this was easy for him either. So we know, though, that if a poem has a rhyme scheme for 3 quatrains and then switches to a couplet at the end, that couplet's going to have some power to it. It's going to establish one side or another. It's gonna really put a stamp or an underline under one of those sides. So beneath the touch of time's unerring hand, like priceless treasures sinking in the sand. So what's happening to America in his prediction? And bonus question, who's doing it? How does America end up? Who does it to her? All right, being destroyed. Being destroyed, Jada. By whom? Anyone? Yes, right. So we see the capital T with time, and we know from many years of literary analysis and literary techniques that that's going to be personification. He's already personified America, so that's an entire essay, right? Why personify America, and why personify America with a feminine personification? And what that means as a male speaker, and maybe not a male speaker, but Claude is a male, and we usually make that jump, right? And so there's not necessarily an indicator of the speaker's gender. However, it just adds to the level of tension and conflict if we, the level of heteronormative conflict and tension. If we say that if the America is a she, then probably that kind of idea of opposites and conflict is going to make the speaker male. Again, very heteronormative. I apologize. So time is going to destroy America. And if we think about this being the way that he's going to end it, the way that this speaker, perhaps Claude, perhaps, small, trying to be important man, the rebel, the way that this person is ending the idea about, even though America has done this to me, is the speaker going to be the one to exact the revenge? No, I'm going to let time do it. And so what does that say about the speaker? So we haven't talked a lot about describing the speaker. We know that America is being portrayed as destructive, as nurturing, but also hateful, as negative, right? These sorts of things that we've been looking at. America is the king, not even has one, but is one, right? So America's in charge of this speaker, sweeping him and strengthening him and vigorizing him. I don't know if that's a word. Invigorating, that's the word. Invigorating him, but also consistently sinking her teeth into his throat and stealing his breath. But what is the speaker's response to this? What is he going to do? And then what is he not going to do? And what does that say about him? So that was a lot of questions, but they were really kind of leading up to the same question, the big question. So I don't necessarily need you to tell me what you see that he's going to do, but rather, what does this say about the speaker, that in the end, he's not actually the rebel. He's going to, he sees time taking care of it. That was trying to lead you. I'm not trying to lead you. What do you think about the speaker? How would you describe him? In order to be able to write about the complexity of the relationship, which is what the prompt says, right? Analyze the complex relationship between the speaker and the subject. And in order to be able to analyze the relationship, we have to know who's in the relationship. So, who is the other person? Judge this person. Is he patient? Is he weak? Is he strong? Okay. So I'll just tell you what I think. If you were typing, continue typing, please. I would love to know what you all think. And if you were thinking, then just tune me out while you continue your thought. But so it seems to me that this speaker is a little resigned to say that time is going to be the one to sink the treasures into the sand, and that he doesn't have endless time. Time has endless time. But so to leave that up to time, even though this America is so destructive of him and determined to over strengthen him, right? But he's not going to use that strength against her. He seems a little resigned to the idea that he is disempowered. And I think all the things I said, right? Like a little patient, but maybe over patient, and probably not, so I say resigned because in the end, not in the end, in the middle of the poem, but in the end of this description, he doesn't have any terror or malice or jeer for this being that is actually determined to destroy him. So let's not take this time. So the idea is that we would, again, collect the pinks, collect the yellows, collect the positive, the negative, and think about the speaker versus the America, and what that means. And so how he's responding, who he is in responding to her destruction, yet nurture, how she's sweeping him with she's destroying him with these positive ideas, right? She's strengthening him and invigorating him, but it's too much. She's flooding him and strengthening him against her. But yet he does not act against her. And so that's a lot, right? But it's an essay worth for sure. And so if you had a prompt that gave you this much, a poem and a prompt that gave you this much complexity, you're ready to lay that out. And so again, I would not, I waited for techniques until the very end, until we were building the thesis, because I didn't want it to be about the techniques. I wanted it to be about the relationship. And so if you establish the relationship in the thesis in the same way that you establish that relationship about school, right, that Natalie gave us, the anxiety versus the preparation means that you should, get help to seek the anxiety. So the same thing would happen. You would be establishing the speaker, America does this to the speaker, or America is this and the speaker is that, which makes the relationship blank. And so if I could just kind of pull from what you all have said, and then, add in the personification, the imagery, the attention. So I like despite, but I'm not going to use it. Maybe in spite of America's destructive behaviors and power over the speaker. We're going to call him he still is nurtured by her and wishes no harm accept the natural erosion of life. I know that went off the, well, I'll pull it up so that when I go back into presentation, it'll be there. And so for me, I would, because that sentence is so full and rich, I would add another sentence for the thesis. And so McKay's personification of America as a feminine and diction of strength. Of destructive strength. Oops. Establish an abusive but forgiving relationship. Okay, I'm going to make these things very, very small so that there's a little more room for this thesis. And then, okay, so sorry for doing all of that while you were sitting and watching. But so that's what we come out with. Okay, yes, thank you, Natalie. I guess I missed those before, right? That Tom's the one that's going to destroy, and that yeah, so that's a really good point, right? He's a pacifist. He's not going to respond aggressively or whatever. And so we come up, and so this would be the idea of the thesis, to make sure that we have not only, because an AP Lit prompt is going to ask you about devices or techniques or choices. And so that's where I wanted to bring in the second sentence, and that it would be fine to combine them. It would be fine to begin with the devices. But I think this captures all of it. And so then you would just write through the poem, which is, always be advice, right? Instead of trying to write a paragraph about personification, a paragraph about diction, a paragraph about the relationship, that you would just write through the poem about how it starts with her behaviors that are destructive and yet, right, nurturing, and then moves through to explain how she is willing to strengthen him against herself, but maybe because she knows that he's not going to respond, right? That even though she has given him strength against her hate, that he's not going to be hateful. And so again, another way that we could look at her is that she takes him for granted, right? And takes that, pacifist nature for granted. So it's 8:57 and I've done a whole lot of talking. I hope though that helped you in terms of some tools and tips to find the complexity, to look for the shifts, look for the transitions. And also if in any time you're looking at a complex portrayal of something, or a complex relationship or complex character, maybe remember that annotation up, down, why, or up, down, both, and why. If you had more time and space, you would give yourself a little note about why, and that would make your commentary easier to construct. And that's what I have. Does anybody have anything that I did too quickly, or you didn't quite understand, or how this might work in steps for a completely different poem? Drop that in the chat. And thank you all for your great participation. Thank you, Selena. I'm so glad. And also, while you were all here, just think about what you need to see from the AP Lit team. We're really open to the kinds of streams that you need, and we're really flexible in what we offer. We'll be here every Thursday and some Wednesdays at 8 o'clock to give you some sort of support in your AP Lit study. But, feel free if you were like, you know what, I really wish I'd been able to see, drop that in the chat as well. Okay, yeah, Selena. So I think you were typing that at the same time that I was saying it. So AP Lit for sure is going to be Thursdays at 8 o'clock Eastern. And so hopefully that's a time that no matter what time zone you're in, especially in America, that you might be able to get to it, might be able to sit in one. Today the time changed last minute. Oh, I'm so sorry. Going forward, it should be Thursday at 8. It changed from 7 to 8, maybe. Yes, 8 p.m. Eastern. Yes, is where we'll be. We'll be talking about poetry for the next few weeks, and then moving into talking about literary argument every Thursday and some Wednesdays. So just kind of keep, kind of check in on Fiveable if there's a Wednesday. But I guarantee every Thursday until Christmas, every Thursday except for Thanksgiving. We won't stream on Thanksgiving. But every Thursday until Christmas, we'll have some content for you, somebody streaming about something at 8 o'clock Eastern. And that was a result of changing. So 7 o'clock kind of was too early for some people. And so that's why the time changed last minute. Okay, understood. Thank you, Selena, for that. And so maybe you want to check in on Wednesday and see which one from the week feels good to you, or maybe you block out 2 hours on a Thursday and say I'll check in on the replay from Wednesday. But we're trying to not be in conflict with other AP courses that lit students are taking. Generally speaking, lit is taken in senior year, like with government, stats, calc, and so I try to keep it from that. All right, well, thank you very much for that feedback, Selena. I'm glad that we are kind of feeling what you're feeling, and we will work accordingly. Thank you all for being here, and feel free to check in on the slides. So for the slide, it'll be attached to the replay, but also I will I'll put the thesis on a whole new slide so it can all be there together. Thank you for being here. Thank you all for your participation. I appreciate you. Enjoy the rest of your Thursday.